Thank you everybody who is joining us today for our webinar on the power of customer data validation in preventing fraud. My name is Ashley McCurry and I'm a marketing coordinator here at Service Objects, and I'll be helping Rob Manser out throughout this webinar. This webinar should only take about 30 to 45 minutes. We will have a Q&A section at the end, but please feel free to put your questions in the chat box below, and we'll make sure we get to them at the end of the webinar. So this is where I hand it off to Senior Product Marketing Manager, Rob Manser.
Great. Thanks, Ashley. And thanks, everyone, for joining. As Ashley mentioned, today we're going to be talking about fraud, different types of fraud, and how customer data validation can be used to detect and fight it in its many forms. I put together a short agenda. Today we'll talk about fraud and what I think is the common denominator in fraud. And then we'll talk about customer data validation and how it works. We'll have a quick poll just to find out about what you're facing when it comes to fraud. And then we're going to take a brief look at 4 types of fraud that are facing businesses today. And then we'll put the pieces together about how customer data validation can be used to fight fraud. And we'll look at some examples in that as well. And then, as Ashley mentioned, we'll wrap up with some questions and answers, and hopefully go from there. So let's dive in. So as I mentioned, I think we think that fraud starts at the account level, at the customer account level. And customer accounts are made up of core identity points, which are the name, the address, the phone number, the email, and the device. And you're going to hear me say those 5 things over and over again in this presentation, because those are the 5 elements that we collect about customers, or some of those elements. And those are the places that you can really use. Those are the pieces of data you have that you can create, sort of paint a picture about if this is a legitimate customer or not, or does this have some sort of fraud element to it. So the point that I make about these 5 points, these 5 data points, is that these are largely generated or gathered by manual entry by a customer, or maybe someone's doing data entry. So that data entry, that manual entry, leads itself to honest data capture errors. I mean, people make typos, they put the wrong address in, they maybe invert a number, stuff like that. But that manual process also is a very quick and easy inlet for bad actors to introduce fake data into your business. And these fake accounts are what give fraud a foothold into your business. And so with that said, those fake accounts are going to have a negative impact on your business. They're going to also hurt your marketing efforts. And of course, it's going to impact your bottom line. So it's important for businesses to have fraud detection and prevention measures in place to protect both themselves, their stakeholders, their employees, as well as their customers. So as well as adding in any sort of measures that might reduce fraud, you're also going to get the bonus of, when you start to validate those data points, you're going to get the added bonus of having really genuine and accurate data about your customers that are real. So you want to get rid of the fake customers, but 2, as an added bonus, you're going to be able to ensure that the customers that you do have in your database are accurate. The contact points that you have with them are accurate, so you can provide good services, or get your products in their hands. With that said, customer data validation is where we're going to start digging into here. It's what is going to help you ensure that the customer data that you capture is accurate, and it's going to help you reveal any of the fraud. And so what customer data validation does is it brings together global authoritative customer data sets from all different sources. And then we marry that with some powerful AI, artificial intelligence, and it gives us some really deep intelligence about the customer and maybe their intent at some level, and so what that does in doing that is it exposes mismatches in the customer data. And so, and a lot of times these are very strong indicators of fraud, or just, it's just called bad behavior. It'll also, as I mentioned, correct and ensure your real customer data is accurate and up to date. And this is going to protect your bottom line. And so with that said, I thought we'd take a little bit of sort of deeper dive into customer data validation. Customer data validation is just ensuring that you have accurate, verified, and up-to-date data. And this is critical in detecting and preventing fraud. A lot of times we have customers that have sort of what we call sort of the front door where we want to capture data coming in and detect if there's fraudulent in there. But there's also the secondary set of historical data that you've captured that needs to be looked at as well. And customer data validation can be applied to both. You might do them in different ways, and we could talk about that at the end. But it's important to understand the impact that validating your customer data has in both preventing fraud and then again making sure you have genuine and accurate customer data. And so customer data validation is going to instantly verify it. This is a real-time API that you're going to apply to the front door, if you will, as well as your data sets. And it's going to ultimately provide accurate contact data for it, and it's going to give you some quality and confidence scores that you can use to programmatically detect bad actors. This isn't ideally this isn't a manual process where you're reviewing each account. Hopefully, we're going to be able to put in some sort of technical measures that are going to allow you to flag and either move fraudulent actors out of your database or flag them for review if that's what's needed. But ultimately, the goal here is to get you to an actionable quality score that allows you to quickly identify problem accounts. So with that said, I thought we'd just dive a little bit deeper into customer data validation and look at the 4 layers of it. And the first layer is this integrity check. And really what this is we're going to verify and correct the accuracy of the name, the address, the phone number, the email address, and the device. And by device, we're really talking about their IP address that's attached to that device. And each piece of these data points are verified in real time, as I said, against global authoritative data sources. And it ensures that we're starting this process with accurate customer data. So if someone mistyped their address or maybe their email address is entered incorrectly, then we're going to correct all those things because we're going to use that data in the next step, which is to augment and extend the customer data. And in this step, we're essentially going to be appending other information that we can derive from those 5 data points. So and a simple example is if you're looking at IP, we might be able to determine that they're using a proxy. A proxy is a very good indicator that fraud's at play or could be at play. Or maybe we're looking at comparing the mailing address, the phone number, and the address that comes back attached to the phone number and their IP address, and triangulating sort of a geographic location to see if this person is relatively close in region. And if they're not, say maybe 2 of the data points are US based and 1 is in China, that should raise an eyebrow, or in our case, help us with the scoring that we're talking about. So all of these data points that we derive are then used in the cross connections, and that's really what I was talking about here. We're going to use those data points, and we're going to start to look for interconnections or cross connections between them. Like I said, maybe the IP address and the mailing address regionally are in sync or out of sync. That might be a simple one to sort of think about. Or maybe the phone number that they provided doesn't match up with the mailing address that they provided. Again, not always a problem, but when you start to accumulate some of these, like this looks like a little bit of a problem, this looks like a little bit of a problem, and you start to marry all those together, you're going to get a better picture about the quality of that lead that you're getting. And so ultimately what this results in is the final piece of customer data validation was the quality signals. And what this really is it results in a quality score, an actionable numeric quality score that you can program around. And so this is going to allow you to, not only set aside fraudulent or bad actors potentially, but also highlight and move forward really strong customer value that moves forward. Sorry, customer scores that move forward. And so that's going to give you confidence to move high quality customers forward, and it's also going to give you confidence to move bad actors or what looks like fraud out of your data sets. So some of the examples that might get poor quality scores is, again, like I talked about, the addresses don't match, or maybe they're using a free VoIP phone number. Those are very easy to generate in a fraud environment. They're used quite a bit. Maybe they're using a vacant lot address as an example, or a disposable mailing email address, or they just made up some horrible name or used some celebrity name because they're lazy basically in creating it. So those all can contribute to what we call sort of this overall confidence score. In addition to that, each of those elements that we talked about, that name, address, phone, email, and device, also get independent scores as well. So one of the reasons this is important is you may, as a business, rely heavily on email as your main contact point versus maybe in another organization, a mailing address or phone number. And so you want to be able to potentially line item out each of those elements and figure out if maybe the email score is really high. So that's all you care about in that environment. So with that said, the whole goal here is to try and fight fraud, and these quality scores are going to help us determine that. So before we dive into sort of talking about fraud, I wanted to do a quick poll and just ask, what is the most common type of fraud that's impacting your business that you're facing today? Maybe Ashley, you would put up a poll there.
Yep, there it is. So you guys can go ahead and pick the options below. While everybody's picking, Rob, I do have a question about the quality score. Is there a certain score that you should look for, or is it kind of up in the air? Like, if we should look at 80% and above, or?
Good question. This is going to be my standard answer. It really is use case dependent. Again, like I said, if you are focused on email versus mailing address, the overall score may not reflect a good or bad for you. Whereas if you focused in on the email scores as part of it, that might be a better place for you to make a judgment. So it's really hard to say that it's this line and everything below it is bad and everything above it is good. What we really want to do is work with you, get your data, run maybe a 500-person list through it, where some of it is bad too. That helps us a lot. And then from that, get a result and then start to look at that, and maybe that's your benchmark to start. So really want to sort of benchmark it first. So
great. So it looks like we have some answers coming through. The top one is payment fraud, followed by fake accounts and delivery fraud.
Great. Well, we're definitely going to take a look at some of these types of fraud. And so let's just sort of dive into the next screen. So like we talked about at the beginning, fake accounts, this is the foundation of fraud for, good accounts are obviously great. Fake accounts is where fraud starts for the most part. And so I pulled out 3 examples of recent fake accounts and what their impacts have been in the different business environments. So one is the California unemployment insurance. During COVID, they put out a bunch of these programs to get more money in the hands of people in need. And one of the things that happened there, because it was kind of rushed as well in trying to meet the need, they really didn't have a lot of fraud prevention in there. And what we saw was a number of fake accounts being created there. And it ended up costing the state of California about $20 billion in fraudulent benefits paid out. And that's basically, scammers basically using fake accounts or fake identities to do that. We also have, in the beginning of this year, there was a group of scammers that created fake social media accounts, and they posed as social media influencer on social media as celebrities and influencers. And basically their whole goal was to to scam people into creating and promoting these cryptocurrency accounts where they would fund them, and then they just take their money and run. Essentially, it was really targeted at the elderly and it was a very effective and unfortunately effective campaign. And then lastly, more of an internal one. Those are both, the first 2 examples are sort of external, where the public is creating fake accounts. The last one is JP Morgan in 2021 bought a company called Frank.com. This has been in the news quite a bit lately because I think that's coming to trial. But the founder allegedly, we'll say that for now, created about 80% of the accounts, and it were fake, were created. And all of this was just to help them drive up the buying price to JP Morgan. So this would have been easily detected if they had some sort of customer data validation service in place and stuff like that. And the only reason they found it is that JP Morgan went to use the list. And when they went to clean up the list, they discovered at that point that it was a bad list. So those are fake accounts. It's one of the first examples. And like I said, I think this is the foundation of most fraud when it comes to the online e-commerce and sort of what is called digital fraud, if you will. So the delivery fraud, this is another type of fraud that we see quite a bit. And in fact, last year alone, The National Retail Federation estimates that about $16 billion was lost to delivery fraud. And what delivery fraud basically is well, it's many things, but it's basically giving some sort of fake address or fake location and having product delivered there. And it's usually in concert with a fake payment of sort. Maybe it's a stolen credit card or fake payment type, or payment on delivery kind of thing. And this is rising, and this has been driven largely because, again, COVID really saw an explosion in e-commerce. So of course, with that explosion became an explosion on opportunity for bad actors. And so and because of that sort of growth in e-commerce, we needed more third-party delivery services. Well, those third-party delivery services themselves weren't necessarily as sophisticated and able to detect bad addresses, if you will, or bad accounts. And when it just made it a lot easier for these scammers to create fake accounts, use either bad addresses or PO boxes, if that in some cases, all of them either not being legitimate or being used sort of nefariously, if you will. And then so that, like I said, goes hand in hand with payment fraud. And I use payment fraud because it covers everything. Credit card, you might think of it more as credit card fraud, but there's other types of payments that fraud can be initiated from. It's you can have credit card fraud, debit fraud, gift card fraud, wire fraud. There's a lot of different payment ways that we can receive payment. And again, the fake account is where it starts. Now, in this case, I'm not so much talking about stolen credit card. I'm talking about when you're trying to authenticate a payment. And maybe you're using two-factor authentication, or you're sending a mobile message or an email to have them do that sort of secondary response to say, yep, I'm who I say I am. Well, none of that works if you don't have accurate email address, or phone number on file for that account. So again, if the customer is legitimate, this should be no problem. But if it's a fake account where they maybe plugged in a phone number that isn't real, or doesn't connect to them, at least, they're not going to get that two-factor authentication on their phone to react to. So this is a place where I think having accurate contact data, specifically email and phone in this case, can really help with fraud. And if you don't, if you're not detecting it or finding it, you're not going to be able to alert one of the things that's important to have customer data validation upfront in this scenario is legitimate customers can put in a bad phone number, they can make a typo, and you really want to be able to capture and correct that with them in real time. So when you send that two-factor authentication, they are able to react to it and respond to it. So it goes both ways. And then the last one that I wanted to talk about is, I wouldn't necessarily think of this as criminal, although if you're in marketing, it is criminal. But this is marketing and promo abuse. This is where you're giving away promotions, free trials, coupons, or bonuses. And really all you're trying to do is get customer data back from them. You want them to fill out a form, and you're going to give them access to a free trial, or you're going to mail them a backpack or whatever it is. But these promos are ripe for abuse, largely because there's no credit card or payment information attached to them. And it's very simple to just hammer in those fields in hope that when you hit submit, you get your reward. And so it's really just, it's really your promo programs are being taken advantage of. And that is going to create a lot of bad data in your system. In addition to, you're going to have this cost of giving away something, but the performance of that campaign is going to suffer quite a bit, because the results of your campaign are going to be polluted with this bad customer data, and it's just going to hurt the performance of the campaign overall. So with that said, this is where customer data validation comes into play. I think you can start to put the pieces together a little bit here, but as we talked about, in less than a second, you can verify those 5 key points: the address, phone, email, the end device, and name, of course, against the authoritative data sources that we talked about. It can be deployed at the point of capture, and it can also be run periodically to ensure your historic customer data also remains genuine and accurate. One of the things to keep in mind outside of fraud is customers' contact information changes. Phone numbers change, titles change, email addresses change, addresses change. And so you may capture them. You may capture a legitimate customer on day one, and it goes through customer data validation with flying colors. But 6 months later, that data has aged a little bit, and you might want to check it. And of course, in the context of fraud, we really want to try and stop them from coming in the front door, and that just sort of eliminates them right away. And as I mentioned, each of those core data points are verified and corrected in real time and scored in real time. So it's going to help you with the accuracy and legitimacy of your customer. So I thought I'd dive into maybe each one of the 5 data points. And it all starts with a name. We have a name validation service, and it parses formats and validates the name at point of entry. And that allows for a number of things. One, if you're working with the database itself, that parsing is really helpful in sort of inserting it into the CRM or business application that you want. But it also allows us to look for any unnecessary data in there, and we can then potentially flag fake names. In fact, when in that California unemployment insurance scam, one of the fake accounts was Mr. Poopy Pants, and I'm pretty sure we would have caught that. In fact, I know for a fact we would have caught that. So that would have been flagged. In that case, we could have flagged that name for review, and likely they would have canceled that account or reached out to the customer to see if they needed it, if they were legitimate or not. So name validation does a number of things. It will look at the name origin. It'll tell you if it's a business or consumer. So sometimes people put the business name in the name field. You really want to know if that's a business name. Aside from fraud, again, if you're trying to personalize any sort of marketing campaign, you don't want to go, hi, Mr. Service Objects. You want to say, hi, Rob, kind of thing. So that helps. But really what we're looking for in the fraudulent side of it is more of this right side bullets here, the vulgar, the nickname, the celebrity, the bogus, or the garbage. And those are, what people will basically make up to create a fake account. And so name validation is very helpful in doing that. And we will give you, as you can see, a score, an overall score, as well as a score for each of those line items to tell you if it's a legitimate person or not. And again, these scores are actionable for you to write business logic around. The next one is address. And address provides key intelligence. Incomplete and incorrect addresses are going to impact your business in countless ways, including fraud. Clearly, if you're delivering a service or a product, you need a good address. So that's for the legitimate customer. But in addition to that, believe it or not, it's actually pretty hard to make up a fake address that doesn't exist, that won't be flagged. You can clearly make anything up you want, but in the United States, for example, we're accessing the United States Postal Service database for mailing addresses. In addition to that, because not all mailing addresses that are available are in the USPS database because they don't deliver to them. There's about 15 million addresses outside of that USPS database, but all of those we have, and we use that to compare against the address provided, and then we'll correct the address if we can make sense of it. That's been our bread and butter for over 20 years. We're very good at correcting and inserting the right variables of an address, or appending maybe the zip +4, because all of those things are going to help with delivery. In addition, but in the fraud world, it's very hard to fake all 5 sort of points on an address, the number, the street, the city, the zip, all of those things, getting them in concert without sort of picking a real address that can be used. It's hard to fake those. So in the global level, it's the same thing. We're going to go to the postal authorities of the different countries, depending on who it is, whether it's Canada Post or the Royal Mail in the UK, or Australian Post, or whatever country that you're focused on. We are working in conjunction with the sort of postal authorities into getting the correct data sets. And we're going to use those to validate and correct the addresses, and then flag them. Again, in this case, we're going to give you a score, as well as we're going to just tell you that this is a deliverable. In the US, we'll tell you it's a deliverable address or not. Again, it's going to reduce fraud and it's going to improve deliverability. So there's a double benefit to doing that. So the next element we'll look at is the phone number, and phone number is key here. Phone numbers provide valuable clues to fraud, essentially. Beyond the phone number itself, which may or may not be made up, which we would detect right away, there's a secondary set here that we get, which is the mailing address, the location they're at. We're going to find out if it's a a VoIP or a portable VoIP, or if it's a wireless number. We're also going to look at things like the longitude and latitude of the mailing address of the phone subscriber. And all of those data points are going to be very valuable in determining, sort of triangulating the location of this customer, and determining if they're a risk. In addition to, of course, that line type, maybe the free portable VoIP, is something in your business is a known fraud indicator, and you're going to flag that very highly as a problem. So phone number is extremely valuable, and that goes sort of hand in hand with email as well. Same idea. We're going to look for disposable and free email accounts, things that are easy for fraudsters to go and generate and create, and then use to create an account. So imagine if you have a mailing address that is suspect, a phone number that is from a portable VoIP, a free portable VoIP service, and then an email from like a free email service. Those three, that combination of those 3 years should raise your eyebrows a little bit. And you can, the nice thing about our services is you don't have to worry about your eyebrow being raised. We're going to give you a hard score that's going to say this looks like a problem, and you're going to be able to act on that however you deem appropriate. Our email validation service is a little different than a lot of the other ones out there. One of the things that most of the email services, including ours, does is they do this sort of top level surface check on an email to see if the syntax is right, and then they'll check to see if the domain exists. Ours is much deeper. We're actually going to ping the mailbox. We're actually going to ping the email server and the mailbox to see if they exist. So it's very hard to fake a bad email address in that environment. You can certainly come up with free and poor ones, or free ones. And those are, again, secondarily sort of an indication of fraud, but you're not going to be able to create a fake email address. And I don't think most people do that, but we want to flag them when we can. And again, there's an added benefit to email validation like the others, in that you're going to see things like, if you're in marketing specifically, you're going to get flags for like a spam trap or a honeypot, or maybe even roll emails, which you don't want to mail to from your marketing campaign. So again, most of these come with secondary, or maybe I wouldn't call them secondary, but two primary benefits. If you're fighting fraud, you maybe are looking for that free account, or the disposable email account. But in addition to that, you're going to want to hear you're going to want to see any other problems you might have with the email list that you want to send to. So the last of those 5 pieces is the IP address. And again, IP is one of those ones where, as a standalone, it's pretty strong. It can tell you the location, but it can't, I shouldn't say it can't. It can tell you the location. It can tell you if it's a proxy server or not. Those are 2 really strong indicators of fraud, but they become even far more valuable when you start to cross compare them with some of these other elements that we talked about. So we might be looking for, you might be looking at the IP address and says that they're in China, but their billing and shipping address are saying they're in the United States. Or it can be more regional than that. It doesn't have to be country apart. That's just an easy example to use. But you might say, hey, your address says you're in New York, but your IP address says you're in San Francisco. Those might be far enough apart for you to sort of say, hey, this is something we want to review. We don't trust this. So with that said, we have a sort of our flagship service, our customer data validation service, which is, it brings together all of these 5 data points. In fact, what it does is taking those 5 data points, we're able to derive about 130 additional data points from those 5 key elements. And that allows us to cross-validate them in multiple ways. And you can start to see the cross connects that you can do in them. So does the name that they provided match the name on the phone account? Does the mailing address that they provided match their phone address? Does the IP address match their location? Is it a proxy? Is it not a proxy? So just the combination of all of those together allow us to quickly identify quality customers and identify fraudulent or bad actors, if you will. And this results in really this overall certainty score, this 83 that you see down here on the bottom corner. That's a combination of looking at all of those 130 key data points, using some algorithms to generate scores, And those scores can be customized. It's important to keep this in mind. Those, if you are predominantly capturing name and email address, you don't want to get negative scores for not capturing address and phone, or vice versa. So there are a number of different iterations of our customer data validation tool that you can basically tweak it to meet your needs. And what we have found best, and as we mentioned early on and when we were talking about, is it's really helpful to get a little small sample of your data, run that through the platform, and then just see how your data lands. And that helps us sort of tweak your settings for the customer data validation. And really dial it into what your needs are. So that's about it for the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Yes, we do have a chat box at the very bottom if you have any questions that you would like to ask. I do have a few for you, Rob. I'll put mine in the chat box so everybody can see. So this customer data validation, you mentioned this previously in your slide deck, but does it involve real-time verification or is it performed periodically?
Again, it depends on how you deploy it. It's offered in a real-time API, so you can definitely tie it into the front end forms on your website. You can definitely, we can do an auto batch. So if, let's just say you have historic data in your database, you can send us an auto batch and we can, whatever time frame you want to put that on or whatever frequency you want to put that on, we could do it that way. As well as we have had a number of our customers really set up the API in two locations, one at the front door, and then that's sort of a secondary internal one where they're just using essentially the same API and putting the data through that, but more maybe in a process related thing, maybe, so a perfect example I can think of right now is we have a sporting goods retailer that uses it at the front door. And then when that order gets sent over to fulfillment, they actually they do it again in fulfillment, because not all orders come through the front door. So when they're doing when they're shipping out products, they want to make sure that they have the correct address. So they do it at the fulfillment level as well. So
awesome. And then how often is our data backed up? Are we real time?
It really depends on the data. So I'll just run down the list. Our USPS address data is updated every 2 weeks, which is the same frequency with which the USPS data is updated by them. Our phone data is updated all the time. It's updated sort of in real time. With that said, we have over 4,000 carriers that give us their data. So it may be that Verizon is updating every 2 weeks, but maybe Sprint is updating, once every month kind of thing. So it's just a combination of that. And so we have all these international phone providers as well that we collect all this data from. So those phone numbers are being updated all the time. Mailing addresses outside of the United States, it's sort of the same conversation. Each postal authority has their own sort of timing of when they do their updates, and we try to be in sync with those all the time. The other ones like email and or email specifically, that's more of a real-time check. We're really checking against live databases that are maintained by us and by third parties, and so that's always in real time that's being checked and updated. So.
Awesome. If anybody has, we just got a question. Is phone number and address validation based on area code? People move and take their old numbers with them.
It's not based on area code. The phone number specifically, if you put it, we have a number of phone products. I should say that first. We have a reverse phone lookup where if you know the phone number, the full 10-digit number in the United States, or and very shortly we're going to release a new product called Phone Validation International, which will do the same for phone numbers. And so in that reverse phone lookup, if you give us the phone number, we're going to be able to give you back not only the subscriber or the person's phone number, so like Rob Manser, and then my mailing address, but we'll also give you back the carrier information as well. So in my case, it'd be Verizon and where it was registered. So you don't need, it's not based on the area code. So for example, my phone number is an 805 number, which is in Santa Barbara, where I lived for quite a while. I moved away from the area, but I kept my phone number. So my phone number area code isn't relevant to my location. My billing address that's attached to my account for the phone number is. So I no longer live in Santa Barbara. I now live in Portland, Oregon. And so if you were to do a reverse lookup of my phone number, you would get my Portland, Oregon address now. So that's how phone number lookup works. I'm not sure if that answered the question completely. What was the second piece, the address?
Yes, so the full question is phone number and address validation based on area code?
So the address validation is not, I mean, unless you're talking about the address in the phone number, it would be valid. It would be validated as part of the reverse lookup phone number. Basically, what we get back from the for the subscriber. For address itself, I mean, we would just be looking at the address elements and validating that against the postal database.
If anybody else has any other questions that they would like to ask below, please feel free. We will be sending out this recording as well as the slide deck for everybody to use in the future. With anything else, there's a thank you slide for all the contact information. Thank you, Rob, for discussing such a hot topic in today's world.
Thank you, everyone, for attending, and take care.